Hello, everyone. Thank you for this kind invitation to talk with you a little bit about some of the thinking that I've been doing around responsible consumption and production. And thank you to James for the invitation to be part of this amazing panel. Learned so much already from the speakers. So my journey in this responsible consumption and production discourse really stems from my want to support the communities that I work for in education, particularly around defining education spaces that reflect their culture and their ways of doing, ways of seeing, ways of being. And another kind of trigger point, I guess, that has caused me to be particularly active in bringing awareness around this is the development of the local environmental assessment process for the Walker landfill that's under discussion right now in the Aylmer area, Ingersoll area. And why it's important particularly to me is because as a member of the Chippewas of the Thames First Nation, that area falls within our treaty territory. And so when we're talking about, building another landfill site in the community, I want to have as much information as possible. I want to be able to contribute my ideas and some of the things that I've learned along the way about how we think about how we use and work with and live along and beside creation, and try to really help not only my understanding, but try to convey, get a sense of what it would look like, I guess, if we were to think through our cultural lens of that decision. So I'm wearing a couple hats as an educator, but also as an activist wanting to bring awareness to the community around the landfill discussion. But in doing that, what's happened is it's kind of led me in all kinds of different directions. So I'm going to start first by just reflecting on how I've come to understand our relationship to food through my culture. I've been really fortunate to be in a position to sit beside these phenomenal elders that come from the Three Fires Medewan Lodge. I've been attending that lodge since probably the early 1990s. And through over those years, I've been able to hear, witness, experience, feel what it is that our ancestors carried for us for so long, generation to generation, in terms of how we believe and see and view the world. And it comes in bits and pieces. And one of the things that I think about when I think about my relationship to food, particularly as I think about a family raising, 3 children, and then how we have a relationship to food, the lodge teaches me something completely different. And so one of those kind of key turning points for me in terms of how I think about food production and the use of food and my relationship to food is when you fast, and when you actually make a decision to go without. And I did this 2-day fast back in, I think it was 2013. I was going through the doorway, and I think one of the things that it just became so real was how completely disrespectful I had been about my food sources and where food came from, and what is it that I'm receiving when I nourish my physical being. And when you go without and you make a commitment, a personal commitment to not eat, not drink for a period of time, it's a rude awakening about how, kind of gluttonous our culture and this society has become around food, and how it's really humbling. So when I think about this kind of story as I'm weaving it together in my relationship with food, this one kind of sits with me, was the most kind of triggering point that caused me to change and shift my thinking about food. one of the things that we're told when we go to fast, and we do it outside, and we built our own lodge, and we're just sitting with our mother, we're told. And in that sitting, when we put ourselves into this kind of state of, I guess, uh, your body just kind of is moving into a new state when you're not feeding it. What it does is it actually, your other parts of yourself open up, and it's true, because we're asked always when we're out fasting, when we're sitting with our mother, that we're to think about everything that's coming to us in all shapes and forms, whether it be sensory, whether it be in dreams, whatever we're seeing as we're working within the lodge that we built. Then we're just kind of really open and forced, if you will, to just be. And so when I think about that time, I just, there's a point in the ceremony, because we're not out there alone. There's a whole community supporting us. They sing while we're out there. We can hear them singing for us. And then there's a big feast waiting that we prepared ourselves to give back to the people for helping us get through this fasting time. But there's a sharing too that happens. So when we come back out, we put on our best dress, and we enter the lodge, and there's this big feast waiting for us. And food has a whole different meaning when you go through that process. You realize how precious it is. And so when you're asked to speak about what are the things that were given to us, or what did we see out there, there's a lot of really incredible healing that happens, because it's done in community. And you're usually not the only faster out there. There's fasters that are out there with you. So they're all telling their story. And each time that a new person tells their story, you're hearing things that you needed to hear, and that actually tell you and give you good medicine for the things that you're dealing with in your life. So food is really situated differently in our culture. And that was my first kind of where I just kind of intellectually kind of heart made connections around how incredibly rich in understanding my ancestors were about their relationship to food. The second kind of really important critical thing that was kind of eye-opening for me, that kind of sits with me, is this powerful rite of passage that our people had for our young women when they menstruate for the first time. We call it their moon time. And for my daughter, she chose, because she's been raised in the lodge, she just understood that that's something that she needed to be doing. I didn't really even have to, convince her or tell her. She just knew, seeing all of her sisters in the lodge before her make this decisions to go without strawberries for a year, or any berry for a year. And this is a rite of passage for our young women when they move from childhood to womanhood. And it's such a beautiful ceremony. And when I think about that time, not only being witness to all the young women that went through the process over the 25 plus years I've been in the lodge, it was just so beautiful to know and see, as each new generation of young people came in and had either been born into the lodge. That just became a natural thing for them to know they have to do. And so she did that. She committed to that. She knew exactly what to do when her grandmother came to visit her for the first time. I wasn't even home. She called me and she said, "Mom, I'm self-isolating. I reminded, my brother and dad not to come close to me. When you're going to be home, and how are you going to, can you help me?" And she had already known the protocols that were involved with her to be sitting with her grandmother for the first time. And in that length of time, she'd have to do that in isolation. And so, but why I'm sharing this with you because of the strawberry fast is, there's a whole teaching behind what the significance of that berry is to our culture and to our people, and to the medicine that it brings. And all of that's obviously being told over subsequent seasons over the many years we've been at the lodge. So we've been able to hear that and understand it more and more each time it's told. And she understood that, and she knew at the moment that that first showing, or that when her grandmother came to visit her, that that she was going to have to go without, that it was going to be her choice to not eat berries for a year. And that's a huge thing to ask of a young person this day and age when everything has berries in it. And I was just really proud of her to make that and learn all the lessons with what that means to be self-determining, to make, you know, a decision about that in her life at that age, to commit to that, knowing that her going without is a teaching of making sure that there's more for others. Finally, another example that I like to share around teachings around food for me personally was, this is my father here. He was a huge activist. Many of you might have known him because he sat on the Thames River revival group for many years as an elected councillor at Chippewas of the Thames First Nation. And it instilled in all of what he taught me about the activist side of life in terms of fighting for, you know, the clean water at the Thames River, working with, he worked with conservation authorities to bring attention to the cultural significance of the river, but also the importance of the teachings and the interconnectedness of everything that that we needed through a healthy watershed. But I'm saying this part of this particular change, or this part in our lives as a family, was when it came to his memorial feast. He passed in January of 2018. And 1 year later in our traditions, it's always important that we always look to our ancestors and make sure that we let them know we're thinking about them. And so 1 year later, we host a memorial feast after they've entered the Western doorway. There's a whole lot of protocols in terms of the things that we'll do to support him and his flock to spirit well over that year. And one of those really important responsibilities we'll have as a family is to feed him when he reaches the other side. And so during that whole preparation of that time, there's so many teachings around, you know, preparation of food and for what purpose and how much, and people are going to come and gather, and you're not to waste. In any of these examples where we feast together, there's a core teaching that there's not to be any waste, and that what you bring there is what we would call our 4 sacred foods, indigenous to this area. And you're always kind of reminded, although, you know, we do obviously bring favorite foods, which might come in the you know, in a Kentucky Fried Chicken bucket. But for the most part, we're really encouraged to put our hands to the food that we produce. There's always these teachings about in anything that we're gifting, when we're wanting to show recognition, when we're preparing these foods, that, you know, the real love comes from you putting your hands on the work. And so producing this food for consumption for yourself, because it's your love being put into the food. So you're cheating, I think, when you go into the local grocery store and kind of pick up the package of cookies and kind of put it down on the ground there in the blanket that's waiting for these to be feeding our ancestors. So that's just, you know, there's so many things in these rites of passage and these ceremonies, as you know, I reflect on them more as when you're having children and trying to understand everything about them, that I recognize the core principles and values that my people held around waste, and that there wasn't to be any, and that food was meant for sharing, and that you were only to take what you needed. And those things spell out in real ways in every tradition and ceremony that's been able to be kept, protected, and revived in our communities. Those are core principles and values in all of our ceremonies. And so I think about, well, what does that mean? Like, what is, me as an educator, what am I going to do differently, like, to ensure we don't have exactly those same structures? There's a real, as a lot of you have described already in this panel, there's this kind of really strong corporate, what's the word, consumer life, right, that we live. And it really removes us really completely in so many ways, degrees of separation away from the very source of life, that we've forgotten it, that we don't even know what it is to protect anymore, because we're so removed from the very source of life. And so it's through this understanding that I feel so strongly, and I'm lucky to be working with 8 First Nation communities in redeveloping their education systems, that we really have to work really hard to make sure that the curriculums that are going to be operating in modern learning systems in our communities have to start with reconnecting people to place. It won't be about describing raw materials turning into consumables. It'll be about reconnecting people to place so that balance can be reset. And that terminology is critical in all of our discussions. So I think one of the things, there's a list here, but we do need to look to the past to guide our future. Ancestral knowledge is so important, not only to us, I think to everyone. We can see what's ahead of us by looking out to the past. We can see, what's coming, because our ancestors have lived through some of these cycles themselves, and have left, enough for us to know better, to know, what the future looks like when we don't keep things in balance. And so I think the biggest and most important thing we need to do is to do this, and that is, the single biggest challenge is for us to act like a community again. That we won't make these changes that are needed unless we do collective action. And so that means that we actually have to know one another as neighbors, and design, communities again around those things. And I see that in my own community as we pick up our bundles again and do these ceremonies again, because none of them are done in isolation. All of that healing doesn't happen with there's a community there supporting you in all of those ceremonies. And so I'm excited about that. I'm excited about the potential of what it means, to work collectively towards a common good of understanding, less is more, and take what you need, don't take any more, and give back what it is you have left over. So that's kind of messaging that I'm grappling with, that I strive to understand more deeply and make connection to. So when it comes to, working with Walker to give voice to the land, these are the kinds of things I'll look and search for to understand better how best to describe that in a way that actually gives voice to the land, in the way that our ancestors would have understood and been able to articulate that for their own children. So I see it as a relationship that's worth working through with folks like Walker, because we should be having our own waste in our own backyards, because it makes us more accountable to our own messes. And so I'm trying really hard to understand how best to think about this, knowing that the system isn't built to work collectively. It's actually quite strongly designed so people can work in isolation, and there's no whole. So with that, that's what I'd like to share for tonight in thinking about this question James raised. And I want to thank you, James, for the opportunity to share a little bit. Miigwech.